The silence in the great hall of Silver Peak was not peaceful. It was a blade, cold and sharp, resting against the throats of everyone present. Alpha King Valerius stood on the obsidian dais, his armor gleaming like frozen blood under the moonlight. He did not look like a mate. He looked like an executioner, without a single tremor in his voice. He spoke the words that shattered 2 centuries of Setter tradition. The bond is a weakness. The Silver Peak needs warriors, not a queen who walks in shadows. Valerius of the iron blood, hereby sever the bond. Elara of the sunless ice is no longer mine. A collective gasp ripped through the hall. 300 high-ranking wolves watched, their eyes burning with judgment, fixed on the small, fragile figure standing at the base of the steps. Elara did not flinch. Her eyes, clouded and milky white, gazed at a point just past Valerius's shoulder. She did not weep. She did not scream. She stood with a stinness that was terrifying, her fingers lightly brushing the worn fabric of her grey dress. Slowly, she reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out her dagger or plea for mercy. She pulled out a single, obsidian black feather. It was charred at the edges, smeared faintly of ancient ash and something cold, impossibly cold. You traded a soul for a border of stone, to Valerius. Her voice was a whisper, yet it echoed louder than Nar, vibrating in the very bones of the guards. You wanted a kingdom of strength, then ruled it in the dark. She dropped the feather. The moment it touched the stone floor, the torches didn't just flicker, they died. Not a single spark remained. The moonlight through the high windows turned to ink, and for the first time in his life, the Alpha King, the man who feared nothing, felt a shiver of pure, primordial ice crawl up his spine. Because in that absolute darkness, the only thing he could see were Elara's eyes, now glowing with a fierce, vengeful gold. The darkness did not leave when Elara walked out a hall. It clung to the walls like a living curse, heavy and suffocating. Valerius stood on his dais, his hand trembling as he reached for the sea and feather she had dropped. The moment his skin made contact with the charred quill, the world shifted. He didn't see the hall. He didn't see his soldiers. For a split second he saw, not the blind, fragile girl he had just discarded, but a celestial entity draped in shadows, standing amidst a sea of burning stars. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving his calm sear with a cold burn that turned his skin grey. My king, Tauren, his lead general, stepped forward, his voice tight with an unfamiliar fear. The torches, they won't relight. The fire refuses to catch. Valerius ignored him. His wolf, usually a roaring engine of aggression, had gone deathly silent. It wasn't the silence of obedience. It was the silence of a predator that had just realized it was being hunted. He looked down at the feather. It was no longer black. It had turned a deep, bruised purple, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. He had traded her for an alliance with the Eastern Fangs, a pact of blood and iron. He told himself it was for the survival of Silver Peak, but as he sat back on his throne, the stone felt like ice against his spine. The hall, once his sanctuary of power, now felt like a tomb. 3 floors above, in the smallest room of the West Room, a room meant for servants, Elara sat by an empty hearth. She didn't need a lamp. The darkness was her oldest friend tonight. It was whispering to her. She held a small, cracked bowl of water in her hands, her blind eyes fixed on its surface. They think sight is in the eyes. She whispered to the empty room. Her voice was like silk sliding over a blade. But true sight is in the blood. A knock came at the door. Up a heavy thud of a guard, but the hesitant, light tapping of someone who knew they shouldn't be there. It was Kaya, a young maid who had once shared a crust of bread with Elara when the Alpha had forbidden her to eat. Elara, I brought you some tea. And a blanket. The frost is coming through the stones. Elara didn't turn. The frost isn't coming from the outside. Kaya, it's leaking from the throne. As Kaya set the tray down, a hand brushed Elara's shoulder. In that instant, the maid gasped. She didn't feel the warmth of a human body. She felt the hum of 1,000 suns. A heat so intense yet so controlled it made her feel invincible. For a moment, Kaya's own blurred vision cleared entirely. She could see the dust motes dancing in the air, the microscopic cracks in the stone, and the terrifying, golden aura radiating from the girl everyone called worthless. Downstairs, in the royal chambers, Valerius lay in his bed, but sleep was an impossibility. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the sensation of a black feather brushing against his throat. The alliance he had bought with her betrayal felt like a noose tightening. He rose and walked to the window, looking out over the kingdom he had saved. But the Silver Peak wasn't silver anymore. The moonlight was gone. The forests were black, and in the distance a howl echoed, not a wolf of his pack, but something ancient. Something that had been waiting for the sunless queen to be set free. His wolf suddenly lurched inside him, clawing at his ribs. Mate, it whimpered, a sound Valerius had never heard it make. We are starving in a world of plenty. Go to her. Go to the door. The third night after the severance brought a cold that did not belong to the season. It was a supernatural frost, one that crawled up the tapestries and turned the wine in the king's cup to bitter slush. Valerius paced the war room, his eyes bloodshot. Every map he touched, every alliance scroll he unrolled, seemed to wither under his gaze. He was the Alpha King, yet he felt like a ghost haunting his own palace. The Eastern Fangs are growing impatient. Valerius, a voice, smooth as poisoned honey, drifted from the shadows of the doorway. It was High Priestess Vora, his father's former consort and the woman who had guided Valerius's hand since the day he took the crown. She stepped into the light, her silver robes shimmering like snake scales. They did not trade their armies for a king who mopes in the dark. They want the sunless girl gone. Permanently. Valerius spun around, his claws extending with a metallic shink. She is already severed. Vora. She is a nobody. Why does a pack of 3,000 warriors fear a blind girl in a servant's room? Vora's smile did not reach her eyes. They don't fear the girl, they fear what she is. The thing you were too blind to see. You thought her eyes were a defect. They were a seal. A seal that I helped your father place on her when she was a babe, to keep the Solaris Flame from burning your house to ash. The air in the room vanished. Valerius felt the ground tilt. You knew. I knew that the moment you rejected her, the seal would begin to crack, Vora whispered, leaning closer, her breath smelling of dead lilies. The Black Feather was just the beginning. If she stays in this fortress, she will reclaim the light you threw away, and you will be nothing but a shadow in her wake. Kill her tonight, Valerius. Before the sun rises and the world sees who the true Alpha is. Valerius felt a roar of fury build in his chest. But it wasn't his own, it was his wolf, finally screaming in outrage. But before he could strike, a deafening crash echoed from the west wing. In the small servants' room, the door had been kicked open. 4 assassins from the Eastern Fangs, their faces hidden by bone masks, moved toward the bed where Elara sat. They didn't use blades, they carried chains forged in cold iron, the only metal capable of suppressing ancient blood. Elara didn't move. She didn't scream for help. As the first assassin lunged, his chains whistling through the air, she simply tilted her head. You smell of fear and cheap metal, she said quietly. She raised her hand, and the bruised purple light from the Black Feather, which she now wore as a pendant, exploded. It wasn't a flame, it was a wave of pure concentrated gravity. The assassins were slammed against the stone walls with enough force to shatter bone. The cold iron chains melted like wax in mid-air, but the effort cost her. Elara gasped, her milky white eyes flickering with a dangerous, molten gold. Blood, dark and shimmering with starlight, began to trail from her nose. The seal was breaking, but it was tearing her soul apart in the process. Valerius burst into the corridor, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. He saw the assassins broken on the floor. He saw the golden smoke curling from Elara's fingertips. And then he saw Vora standing at the end of the hallway, a dark ritual dagger in her hand, her eyes glowing with the same violet malice he had seen in the vision. She is a monster. Valerius! Vora shrieked. Look at what she's doing to your home. Seize her. The palace guards, torn between their king and the priestess who had ruled them for decades, hesitated. Valerius looked at Elara. Small, bleeding, yet standing with a dignity that made his crown feel like a cheap toy. He remembered the feeling of the feather. He remembered the warmth that had briefly saved his soul. He didn't order his guards to seize her. Instead, he did something that silenced the entire wing. He stepped between Elara and the guards, baring his throat, not to his enemies but to her. If she is a monster, Valerius's voice was a low, terrifying growl that shook the very foundations of the Silver Peak. Then I am the beast who deserves to be destroyed by her. The silence that followed Valerius's defiance was heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and ancient magic. Vora's face contorted into a mask of pure demonic rage. She didn't just want Elara dead anymore. She wanted to erase the very memory of the Solaris line. You fool, Vora screamed, her voice cracking like dry parchment. You would choose a broken girl over 1,000 years of dominance. Then you shall die with her. Vora raised the ritual dagger, and the shadows in the corridor began to bleed from the walls, coiling around her arms like obsidian serpents. She lunged, not at Valerius, but at Elara, aiming for the heart that beat with the rhythm of a dying sun. Valerius moved with a speed that defied human sight, his massive body shielding Elara, his claws clashing against the dark magic. But the shadow serpents were relentless, cold as the void, draining his strength with every touch. He fell to one knee, the frost returning to his skin, his eyes flickering as the curse of the Eastern Fangs began to take hold. Elara? Run! He gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. But Elara did not run. She stepped forward, her hand finding the back of Valerius's neck. The moment her fingers touched his skin, the soul spark became a wildfire. Seal is not my cage, Valerius, she said, her voice now resonant, vibrating with the authority of a goddess. It was your shield. And now, I release you from it. She reached for the black feather pendant and crushed it in her palm. A sound like 1,000 glass bells shattering echoed to the Silver Peak. A pillar of blinding, white gold light erupted from Elara, tearing through the roof of the west wing and piercing the black clouds above. The darkness didn't just vanish, it was annihilated. A milky white film over Elara's eyes burned away, revealing irises of molten gold that held the heat of a supernova. Her grey dress transformed, the fabric weaving itself into a gown of solar silk that shimmered with the colors of a dawn that had been hidden for 3 centuries. Vora shrieked as the light touched her, her shadow magic evaporating like mist in a furnace. She fell to the floor, her silver robes turning to ash, her true form revealed, a withered, ancient hag who had stayed young by drinking the warmth of the Solaris line. "No, this is impossible," Vora wailed, her eyes melting under Elara's gaze. "The Solaris were extinct. I killed them all." "You killed the wolves," said Akid, hovering inches above the stone floor. "But you forgot the sun." Elara raised her hand, and the golden light focused into a single point on Vora's chest. It wasn't a strike of pain, but of truth. The priestess's memories, her crimes, her betrayals, they were projected onto the walls of the palace for every guard, every servant, and every noble to see. They saw the murder of the old king. They saw the forging of the fake alliance. They saw the slow poisoning of Valerius's soul. The palace guards dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. Not in fear of Valerius, but in worship of the queen who had returned the light to their world. Valerius stood up, the frost on his body evaporating, his heart beating with a heat so intense it felt like joy. He looked at the woman before him, no longer the blind girl he had rejected, but the Luna he had never deserved. He didn't wait for a command. In front of his entire court, in the ruins of the corridor, the Alpha King of Silver Peak dropped to both knees. He lowered his head, his forehead touching the hem of her golden gown. "I am a king of stone and ash," Valerius said, his voice thick with a raw, honest emotion. "I sought power and found only ice. My Luna, my life, I do not ask for your forgiveness. I only ask that you allow me to spend the days mine the right to stand in your shadow." Elara looked down at him, the molten gold in her eyes softening to the warm amber of a summer evening. She reached out, her hand cradling his jaw, warm against warm, skin against skin. "Stand up, Valerius," she whispered, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "A king does not kneel, but a mate stays." The transformation of Silver Peak did not happen in days, it happened in heartbeats. As Elara and Valerius walked hand in hand toward the great hall, the very stone beneath their feet seemed to breathe. The black frost evaporated, replaced by veins of white marble that glowed with a soft, inner light. By the time they reached the obsidian days, the moon had been replaced by a sun so bright it felt like a miracle. The dead forest surrounding the castle turned a lush, vibrant green, and the frozen rivers broke their icy chains with a roar of pure liquid joy. The Eastern Fangs, the allies Valerius had once sold his soul to, fled the borders like rats from a burning ship. They knew that a kingdom ruled by a Solaris queen and arm-lord king was a fortress no army could ever breach. Valerius did not wear the iron crown that day. He took it from the throne and, with his own hands, crushed the cold metal into a simple, elegant circlet. He placed it upon Elara's head. The Silver Peak was built on iron and fear. Valerius spoke, his voice carrying to the furthest edges of the territory, resonant with a warmth that made the wolves howl in celebration. "From this day forward, it is built on light. My Luna is not just the heart of this pack, she is the sun that keeps our souls from freezing." Elara looked out over her people. Her vision was no longer milky white. She saw the world in colors more vivid than any human eye could perceive. She saw the threads of fate connecting every living soul, and she saw the golden thread that tied her life to the man standing beside her. "I was a nobody's daughter," Elara whispered, loud enough for every wolf to hear. "I was a payment for a debt, but a debt paid in blood is a debt that ends in fire. We are no longer a pack of shadows. We are the dawn." Life in the palace changed. The servants no longer whispered in fear, they sang in the kitchens. The warriors trained not for conquest, but for protection. And every evening, Valerius would find Elara in the royal gardens that now bloomed with flowers that only opened under the touch of her golden light. But as the sun set on their first month of peace, Elara stood at the edge of the balcony, her eyes fixed on the distant dark peaks of the southern waste. The golden glow in her eyes flickered for a moment, turned into a sharp, piercing silver. Valerius stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his warmth a constant anchor. "What is it, my Luna?" The shadow of Vora was only a finger. "Valerius," she said quietly, her hand tightening over the stone railing. "The hand that sent her is still moving in the deep south, and it has realized that a son has returned." Valerius's wolf growled, a low, protective rumble. "Let them come. We are ready." Elara turned in his arms, a small, mysterious smile on her lips. "I know we are. But I wonder, are they ready for what happens when the sun decides to hunt? Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Was there a moment when your heart stopped, just as mine did while telling this tale? If you felt the warmth of the Solaris Flame, hit that like button and subscribe to join our pack. You won't want to miss what happens next. When the southern wastes finally reveal the secret they've been hiding for 1,000 years. I will see you in the next tale.